Welcome to today's Industry and Campus webinar. We are excited to be joined by Aporto today. I'm Jason Martin, your online event production manager at Educause, and I'll be your host today. Educause is pleased to welcome today's speakers, Anthony Awaida, James Leonard, Travis Nation, and Beth Rugg. They'll introduce themselves in just a moment, but first, let me give you a brief orientation on our session's learning environment. We hope you'll make today's session interactive. Please open the chat, click on the chat icon at the bottom of the presentation window, and there you can use the chat to make comments, share resources, and to post questions for our presenters. Be sure to select everyone from the drop-down menu to engage with all participants. We will hold a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but we encourage you to type your questions into the chat throughout the webinar. If you have any technical issues, you can direct a private message to me by selecting panelists in the chat drop-down. A reminder that the session's recording and slides will be archived later today on the Educause website. And with that, let's return to today's session. Today's session, we will hear from a panel of experts as they discuss their motivations for change and share experience of moving from on-prem VDI to the cloud and the impact on students, faculty, staff, and the overall institutional community. And with that, thanks for joining us today, and I'll hand things over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you all for joining today. My name is Anthony. I'm the CEO, founder of Aporto, but I do realize you're not here to listen to me. You're here to listen to our panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. If we can start with you, Beth, if you don't mind, then James, and then Travis.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Rugg. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Client Engagement at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. My team, I'm responsible for desktop support, endpoint management, service desk training, documentation, and communication. We've got about 30,000 students and about 5,000 faculty staff, just to give you a sense for how big our institution is.
Thank you, Beth. James.
Thanks, Anthony. My name is James Leonard. I am the CIO and Senior Director of IT Operations at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been in the role for about 2 years, and we have about 2,000 total customers, split among about 1,500 students, 300 staff, and 200 faculty. Very nice to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Travis Nation. I am the Vice Provost for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer at Seattle University. And, delighted to be here. Our university is about 7,500 students, 1,500 faculty and staff.
Great. Thank you all. So before we talk about where we are today, if you don't mind, I presume a lot of the folks who are in the audience are in a state where perhaps they have an existing on-prem VDI, perhaps they have no VDI in place, but perhaps let's start with a poll here, if you don't mind, Jason. If you can open the first poll, and really we're trying to understand what you have in place today, because obviously we want to gear this conversation to discuss what you have in place and how the members of our panel have moved from probably a setup that's similar to what you already have in place to a cloud-based setup. So if you could take a few seconds here and answer this poll, and we will share the results of this poll with you. Keep in mind, we're not going to use this information against you, since the information is held by Educause and is not, unfortunately, it's not going to be shared with us.
Alrighty, and I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. Here you are, Anthony.
Wow. Okay. Citrix, VMware, other, and no VDI. Okay. Well, I think that's a good representation of what we have on the panel today, if you don't mind closing that poll. So perhaps if we can start by going back in time, and for some of you that might be a few years back in time, and if you could tell us what did you have in place in terms of on-prem VDI, and why did you introduce VDI in the first place? And Travis, if you don't mind, if we can start with you and go from there.
So we had a VMware Horizon installation, and we had implemented, just for the same reasons many of you have the the same configuration, in that what we were trying to do is make it available to students and faculty wherever they were. So help them access it 24/7, not having to go to a physical location and so forth. So for us, it was a need. We had to have it, and it made it also easier to centralize the administration of it.
Thank you. Beth?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. I've been here since 2014, and we had Citrix on-prem at that point in time. And I think probably from 2014 to probably 2019, when we went to Oporto, we kept looking at different virtual desktop or streaming application vendors and opportunities. Our main goal was really to find a solution that was very easy for our students to use. We have many students who are have real financial needs, so, and may or may not be able to physically get to campus. So we wanted to try to find a way to make it as easy as possible for them to get access to that specialized software. So I answered the what and the why, hopefully. Did I get it, Anthony?
Yeah. So, I remember also you folks had the cloud first initiative. Does my memory serve me right? Is that about right?
It is. We had a new CIO come on board about 2013. Same thing, really looking to, I won't say it was explicitly cloud first, but really trying to figure out what that best mix of local versus cloud offering should be, and what we could really gain some opportunities from by leveraging the cloud, thus the topic for today's conversation.
Very cool. James?
Thanks very much. Yes, like Beth, we were on Citrix as well. And we had a few drivers that led us in the direction of cloud. Among those, in our case, is that we had a server room that was in very high demand, a very high demand area physically in our building on one of the lower floors. Saw a lot of traffic, and lots of people had their eyes on that space. So we were looking to decommission our server room for that purpose. Additionally, as Anthony is aware, we also had a cloud initiative, which was directed not only at what we were doing in our server room, but also physical computer labs, because we had designs on removing those from campus as well. So all of that sort of contributed to our direction in going to the cloud.
Right. So you guys were ahead of your time in some ways, I guess. There's a lot of turmoil in the space, without mentioning, any specific vendors and whatnot. But tell us about, what were some of the drivers that got you thinking and eventually moving from your on-prem environment to the cloud? Beth, if we can start with you.
Sure. I think the main driver was really finding a solution that was very easy for the students to use. With our on-prem installation, we had students who were having a lot of difficulty with just the client and getting it to work consistently. Also, just understanding where were their files stored and how to print. Not necessarily rocket science, but for students, you want to reduce those barriers as much as possible. So that was really a prime driver for us. As I think James mentioned, we were also interested in reducing our lab footprint. I think that is still an interest. We haven't made a lot of progress towards that end at this time, but that idea of, do we still need physical computer labs? How can we provide more flexibility was also important to us. And of course, just looking at the footprint of the local installation, I think we're up to 24 servers. Every time we had to do an upgrade, it was a significant work effort where we would involve consultants and staff time and resources. We were being asked to do more with less, as I know everyone around is. So we were hoping that by finding a cloud partner and a virtual offering that worked well, that it would meet all of those needs. Excellent.
Thank you. James?
Thanks. Yes. As we touched on a little bit already, support costs and effort and management expense were factors that led us in this direction. We, at the time we were using Citrix, had a full-time resource responsible for keeping track of it, which it put us in a situation where that person, of course, could not do other things that could bring value to our school. So that was a driver. Hardware refresh. As time goes by, certainly hardware ages and it doesn't, rejuvenate itself. So it has to be replaced at some point, and that was a consideration. And then something that's often overlooked is off-hours support. We've got clearly a situation where our students, for the most part, are doing their work during the day while on campus, but lots of stuff happens with students at night, and they get connected to VDI infrastructure. More often than not, it works just fine. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we don't necessarily have a presence physically on campus in the case of VDI. So cloud in some ways alleviated that concern from our operations as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Travis?
Thanks. For us, it was, as James mentioned, we had a major hardware refresh. The underlying infrastructure was aging out. And so that was the driver for us to look at the environment and decide what we wanted to do at that point. As Beth mentioned as well, looking at things from a student perspective. And one of the major things that we struggled with was, in some cases, we weren't able to run the software that we wanted because we didn't have an environment that had GPUs and the compute power that was needed. So as we look to a cloud offering, being able to offer the full portfolio of software and services that the students and faculty were clamoring for was a big thing for us. So especially that GPU component of it. So for us, that was a major factor in moving this direction.
Yeah. So if I can piggyback on that question, Travis, so obviously you knew what your challenges were. And perhaps as a follow-up to that, what kind of, what criteria, if you were to summarize those, obviously you had, maybe an extensive list of criteria. What criteria, were on top of your list when you were looking for a cloud solution to replace your existing on-prem solution?
So a couple of things that were really important to us is obviously the ability for the students to be able to use it where they are and so forth, at the time they need, as my co-panelists have already mentioned. Additionally, what we didn't want to do was just take an on-prem infrastructure and move it to the cloud. And that really doesn't harness the power of the cloud. And what we found with the Oporto product is that it really was a game changer for us. We were able to leverage employees in different ways. So we were able to shift employees around and have them do other value add work. So as we were looking at what it's going to take to move to the cloud, what the criteria need to be, what the outcomes are, it was primarily focused on the student experience, the faculty experience, being able to deliver the software that they needed and such. It's cost is obviously a consideration, and we'll talk about that later, but the main factors are resiliency and keeping that system running so that when they need it, it's there and it has the applications and software that the students and faculty need.
Thank you. That's a great answer. I want to share this insight that surprised me. I was our product manager, our VP of product management, Heather, who's on the call, and we were looking at some statistics to understand the demographics of, the students who are using our environment. And we were surprised to see that 15% of the student body who uses our service has Chromebooks. Another 40% has Macs. So Windows, which I expect to be the vast majority, turns out to be in the minority. And therefore, that's a very important consideration that we hear from many of our customers, from a digital equity perspective. If somebody has only a Chromebook, maybe they have an old PC, how do we deliver to them the same experience that somebody who has, a gaming PC? So it's really important to realize that the demographics are changing. And maybe in the past, Windows would be 75, 80% of the student population, but that is changing, and it's changing very fast. James, do you want to add to this?
Sure, thank you. In addition to support costs and management effort, I think, Anthony, you hit the nail on the head in terms of solution being device agnostic, which was extremely important to us. Coupling that with one other aspect that I think often is overlooked as well is the absence of the necessity to install a client locally. Porto and other solutions, I'm sure, have the advantage in that you can pull up a fully functioning desktop or fully functioning application through a web browser. So when you start to talk about that as it's coupled with being device agnostic, the ability to pull things up by a browser becomes much more valuable. So those were drivers for us as well.
Yeah. And in fact, it reminds me, you probably remember Velma, who was the systems administrator of your old on-prem VDI tool. And, she retired a couple of years ago, and she sent us the sweetest email as she was retiring. And she said in that email, you guys made my last 2 years at Emory so much easier than the years before. It was much nicer. I was much less stressed. So anyway, it was a very nice email that Velma sent to us.
Anthony, could I add? I just wanted to add a couple pieces, if I could,
Sure,
please.
of course.
One thing that also has not been mentioned, I think, but was a predictable spend. When we were looking at other cloud offerings, it's important to understand what you're going to be charged for and whether or not that's predictable or not. And we found that by partnering with Porto, there was a way that they did that licensing, which allowed for predictable spend, which is a really unique characteristic when compared to other vendors. And this is not a sales pitch for Porto. I'm just saying these were factors that we considered in our decision making. The other thing that we found was that it was really devoted to that faculty student experience. I think other vendors are casting a much wider net. They do what they do very well, but there were some unique features, reporting capabilities that I think could just demonstrated, I think, Porto's commitment to that faculty student experience.
Thank you, Beth. That was a great addition. So obviously, probably many people on the call are like, okay, I understand, there may be, good drivers to move to the cloud, but I'm concerned about this rip and replace experience and what does it mean? So perhaps, James, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about, your experience moving from the traditional on-prem environment to a cloud service like Porto. What was it like from an implementation, from a resource consumption, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think anytime you have a big change like what we're talking about here, it's not pain-free. And I think any expectation that it's smooth sailing and it's quick and it's snap of a finger and the new system is up and running is probably to an extent unrealistic. But I do also think that as was our experience, when you have a vendor that is very hands-on with the implementation process, it makes things go much better. And as Beth pointed out, having predictable costs and knowing what that level of effort is going to be and to what extent your chosen service provider is going to be involved is critically important to smoothing out that transition. And we found that to be extremely helpful as we moved from on-premise to cloud technologies. Time to create an image. So if you've got a complicated configuration in your existing VDI environment, and that needs to be replicated on the cloud, clearly the more complex it is, the more time it takes to accomplish that transition. So building in the time necessary for that in conjunction with coordinating with a service provider is something to consider, because when you're on VDI, when you're on your own infrastructure, to an extent you have control over that because you can devote a certain number of resources to it and therefore somewhat predict how long things are going to take. But as you're moving to the cloud, it oftentimes you're relying on a vendor, so you have to have a clear understanding as to what those timelines look like as you're moving forward. Finally, user education. If you have a VDI environment that in the past, as I mentioned a moment ago, relies on a client, a locally installed client, and you're moving users from a client to a browser-based interface, there are some user experience related discussions that need to be had with your end user community, because the experience is different. It's not worse, it's just different. And anytime there's a big change, it requires proper communication to align that with what user expectations are.
Excellent. Before I pass on to Beth, there was a question that I think deserves an answer. And so the question is, how did you handle application that require USB connectivity. The good news, we just introduced what we call a web USB, and a Porto web USB, and it enables you to connect to devices or to PCs that are connected to on-prem, USB devices. And if you're interested in that, please reach out, and we'd be happy to put you on that beta program. And sorry, there was another question about Canadian customers. And yes, we have a whole bunch of Canadian customers. Obviously, that, for instance, South Alberta Institute of Technology, and a bunch of others that I cannot remember right now. But we have a whole bunch of Canadian customers, and we do understand that Canadian customers have a requirement for data residency in Canada. And of course, we would be happy to provide for that. Sorry, to go back then to the questions, Beth, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about the implementation process. What was it like for you?
Sure. For us, we tend to adopt kind of a phased implementation process. So we always have a pilot before we go broad-based. And we just really engage very closely with our faculty members. We had several different meetings with them. We tried to gauge who would be interested in doing a pilot with us. We asked them throughout that semester. We surveyed both the students and the faculty 2 or 3 times to make sure we understood what the experience was like, as well as our staff supporting the rollout. For us, I think it was actually very smooth. I don't remember, it was probably honestly just, let's say 2 to 4 weeks to get everything up and running. It was almost more work to identify who would be in the pilot, and then to help them to understand what we were trying to do and why we were trying to do it, because we had piloted a few other options. So for us, it was a very positive experience.
Right. Yeah, I mean, again, I have to be careful setting expectations, but we had one customer, California State University, Bakersfield, who called us on a Friday, and they said, during the pandemic, we're shutting down our labs. The campus is going to be shut down. We need to have the solution up and running by Monday. And our engineers worked with their engineers through the weekend, and we had it up and running by Monday. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm not saying you should do that or you should plan for that. But we can, because we're cloud-based, because everything is in the cloud, you can set it up and run it very, very quickly. So I'm going to move to the next question. So in Educause, top 10 IT issues for 2023, adaptability is key. And, that resonates very strongly with me because, obviously those universities, like probably you, Beth, probably you, James, who were ready with virtual computer lab before the pandemic, obviously did not have much to do during the pandemic, maybe add some capacity and whatnot. But, even though the pandemic is largely behind us, it's my personal opinion that, COVID is still going around. In fact, I got COVID about 6 weeks ago after I took a trip to Colorado. And a lot of my friends are getting either COVID or there's some new virus going around. The point is, being adaptable is very, very important. So tell us a little bit, Beth, about, how do you view adaptability, and how does this project help you achieve that, which, again, according to Educause, is a very important, objective for IT in 2023.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. We were lucky, right? We went with the cloud service in 2019, not knowing the pandemic was going to be upon us quickly. Being flexible, that's what everybody needs right now, right? Whether it's a hybrid workforce, whether it's students that are hybrid or taking fully online, or some other kind of offering. I think that's really what this cloud offering brings, is that flexibility, and it's easy to use. You also already mentioned the cost implication, knowing students don't necessarily have the most up-to-date devices. One thing that was interesting for our institution was we're a large state public institution. We did not have a laptop requirement pre-pandemic. We did put one into place pretty quickly in May of 2020 for obvious reasons. And we still felt that was necessary, even though we offered this cloud offering for just a variety of other reasons, because the students were so dependent on that computing device for their learning experience. So yeah, I think that that ability to be extremely flexible and adaptable. We also are much better we're able to answer our faculty's needs more quickly. So if a faculty member or department comes to us and say we have X, Y, and Z need, we can deploy that fairly quickly, much better than we were able to do when we had that on-prem offering. So I think that's really important, as our institutions are still figuring out what this new kind of post-COVID world looks like. The ability to scale and to be adaptable is really important. The limiting factor, as I think we're all experiencing as well, is the unpredictable financial outlook, right? So I think that is the contrast. And I know it's also an Educause's top 10 issues, right? But being able to forecast kind of the cost of higher education, what our budget's going to look like, that's always, I guess, brings a bit of reality to any of these kinds of discussions. Good news, high flex, always budgeting is always an issue.
Yeah, very good point. In fact, I just got reminded that your computer science department became interested in our cyber labs offering. And, if you wanted to set that up, I guess, in an on-prem environment, then, requisitioning the hardware, setting up Linux environments, with nested virtualization and all of that, that probably would take, I don't know, you can tell us 6 months, a year, whatever it takes. In the cloud, it would take probably a week or two, and now you're up and running. So yeah, 100%. Sorry, James, if you could also answer that question, adaptability, how do you think this fits in terms of achieving that adaptability that seems to be very important in 2023?
Yeah, I entirely agree with what Beth said regarding flexibility being a key element to moving forward, as we all have endured the pandemic and what came with it. Flexibility in terms of being device agnostic, as we talked about a little bit ago. But something else that we've noticed on our campus, because we coupled this move to the cloud and from VDI along with the decommissioning of our physical computer labs, is how gathering spaces have evolved. In our case, physical computer labs in the past weren't necessarily the most vibrant experience for students or anyone else passing through, as people sort of look forward at their monitors and things like that. But now, as people are coming back to campus now, students are interacting in the way that sort of has organically evolved. We find that students are gathering in outdoor spaces and cafes and other areas where in the past they didn't gather, and we find this to be a very healthy development, not only because it increases their productivity and facilitates their ability to work in groups, but also creates a more vibrant campus for us and a better overall experience for passersby and for students themselves. So that's been our experience.
James, you hit it right on the nose. I think when universities are looking to attract incoming students, they show them probably their library. They show them their open spaces. They show them how vibrant those spaces are. I don't think they take them and show them, computer labs, rows and rows of computers in computer labs, which to me anyway don't seem to be all that inspiring versus working in an open lab environment where you can work with your colleagues, etc., etc. So that's a really good point. Thank you. So obviously cost, I'm sure, is on everybody's mind, and I'll talk to a question that somebody popped here about connecting to on-prem servers, on-prem devices. But before I handle that, tell us a little bit, Travis, about the before cloud, after cloud, kind of the cost equation. How does that all balance out?
Yeah, thanks. So when you look at it, as I mentioned, our driver was the need to do a major refresh of the equipment on campus, which, as we all know, is a big CapEx expenditure and so forth. And so moving to cloud, you're moving CapEx to OpEx and focus that way. for us, there's not necessarily a net savings if you pencil everything out. We didn't necessarily save any money, but as my co-panelists have mentioned, you do have things like that 24/7 support. You do have the cloud infrastructure behind you where your business continuity is in a much better place, at least speaking from Seattle U's perspective. The other thing is that having the support of the Oporto team behind it, when we need to roll out a new application or a new setup configuration, they help us with most of that. So we've been able to shift our resources around. We don't have a huge staff like many of you. And so we were able to repurpose our staff to do more value add work. And one of the things I'll note is this year, now that we've been on the Oporto system, our faculty came back and I got several emails from them saying that this was the best year for deploying new systems and new software that we've ever had. We were able to do it on a much faster time. And so for us, the dollars in essence just shift from one methodology to a different methodology, but the service levels have increased significantly. Things that we couldn't do before, we are able to do now. For example, faculty can go in and mirror a session. They could do that before, but it was very complex. Now it's very easy for them. So there are a lot of advantages. So dollar for dollar, it's about the same, but service for service, we've gone up.
Thank you. Thank you, Travis. Yeah, I mean, keep in mind that you guys are in the early stages of your rollout, Travis, and we have features where a student could take an assignment and drop it in your learning management system in one click. We're working on a new feature for this upcoming release where a student could drop a link to their virtual desktop in the learning management system. Why is that important? If I'm writing some application and it doesn't seem to be running and I'm stuck, describing that to a faculty or getting him in real time to help me out may be problematic. If I can drop a link and the faculty has access to my virtual desktop to help me out, that's a huge win. Or if I'm working on an MIS assignment, which involves, a network of computers or a virtual network of computers, dropping a link to my virtual desktop is a huge win. So thank you, Travis. James, if you could talk a little bit about costs.
Sure. From our experience in a concurrent licensing model, which is something that we use through Oporto, but also offered by other cloud providers, we've found that the lighter weight the concurrent desktops are, the easier it is to compare apples to apples in terms of cost of VDI versus cost of concurrent licensing in the cloud. The more specialized, the beefier the configuration in terms of what types of desktops and applications are needed, that one-to-one comparison with costs doesn't hold up as well as the larger sort of machines, virtual machines that you get into. Nonetheless, even in our case, we do have sort of large-sized concurrent licenses that we utilize. There are a whole, and Travis touched a bit on some of this, there are a whole range of costs, hidden and otherwise, that we don't have to deal with anymore having moved to the cloud. All of the management expenses, Velma's time, as you mentioned earlier, Anthony, was able to retire without us missing a beat in terms of managing our our infrastructure, our cloud infrastructure for the delivery of these desktops. All kinds of other costs, support management, hardware, as we've talked about at length at this point. And when you start to consider all of those advantages and the opportunity costs that existed as a result of having on-premise VDI in the past, it frees up our staff to do other value-add things that in the past was not an option for us because we spent a lot of time managing physical infrastructure. So again, cost, a direct comparison, it depends on your implementation, but in our case, we have seen some savings.
Great, thank you. Beth?
Pretty much +1 to everything that's already been said. I think the only thing that I did want to highlight Regarding cost, centralizing the cost and potentially even charging back, what we're finding basically for the standard type of desktop/GPUs, that's coming out of a centralized bucket. But as we get some more unique requests, either from our College of Computing and Informatics or from a Belk College of Business, I think as we're processing those requests, we think there's going to be an opportunity to charge back some of those costs, right? Because you can control access to the appropriate groups as needed pretty easily. So that is a way that you can scale the system without necessarily having to assume or centralize all the costs associated with it. And I've seen some chatter in, in the chats about software licensing. We still do have one kind of big product suite that we have not licensed for virtual desktop, and that's Adobe. I think so. We might sound like we have it all together. We don't yet. We're still working on some of these issues. And I think those really become funding decisions, right? Or it becomes finding that key stakeholder on the academic arena who can partner with you to champion some of those software requests and needs to figure out how those costs are paid for. I saw somebody else earlier had mentioned or asked about Azure Desktop. And honestly, we briefly looked into that. We had just gone to our cloud offering in 2019, and I think Azure Desktop kind of came online in 2020, 2021, and we looked at it briefly, haven't been able to get back to it because many of our pain points have been alleviated. I think as I hear and see schools that are looking to centralize on some of their other kind of cloud computing contracts, that may become a more viable option. So let's say, for example, you want to be a Microsoft school, or, you're going to go all in, then it's probably very worthwhile looking at some of those other offerings, even if they are in the cloud. It just wasn't something that we've done yet.
Thank you. There's a number of questions that I think would be worthwhile answering. One question that I think people would be interested in, is there a possibility for us to use servers on premise and use a portal? And the answer is absolutely yes. We do have customers who use our hybrid architecture. Our hybrid architecture enables you to use our cloud-based control plane to manage and control your on-prem servers. And that can be, quite attractive. A hybrid architecture, in fact, has the following advantage, which is if you do have some legacy hardware you want to take advantage of, you're not ready to pull the plug on those, you can take advantage of those servers. And as you decide, if you decide to migrate to the cloud, then it's a very smooth transition. The control plane is exactly the same. And now you're managing servers that reside in the cloud versus on-prem. Can you perhaps, Travis, talk a little bit about retraining, since you've gone through this process recently? What impact has this change made to your team, to the skill set they've required, etc.?
Well, I think there's two components to that. There's the faculty/student side of it, so the user, the consumer side, which that training was really easy compared to what we were using before. So I know Beth spoke to this earlier, but it was a straightforward transition. In our case, what we did was we started with a couple of early adopters and got them familiar with it and used them as advocates, as well as to help us with any augmented documentation that needed to be done. For our internal IT team, it has really shifted what we do. Previously, our team needed to be experts in VMware Horizon, needed to understand the whole stack, how the software played with each other, etc., and all the applications that we were deploying. Now, what we are doing is more working with our faculty to say, what do you need on the service? What do you need deployed, and so forth. Then we partner with Aporto and make sure that that happens and gets deployed appropriately. So the skill set needed is very different. The amount of time needed is a lot less. So we've actually taken our resources and shifted them over to other cloud-focused initiatives that we're working on for the most part. So it has reduced a number of FTE down to a fraction of an FTE in our case. May not be true for everybody in all situations, but it has been true for us. And speaking to the the Windows desktop and so forth. That is one of the things we did look at. And what we decided was, as I had mentioned earlier, shifting to either the AWS desktop or the Azure desktop version meant that all we were really doing was shifting the workload from on-prem servers to virtualized, cloud-based servers, but that the work on my team would continue in essence the same, only in a different platform. Whereas shifting to Oporto has really dramatically helped us and allow us to provide more value to those that we serve. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you, Travis. Great answer. Thank you. James?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add on that, Anthony. I think the others have covered it. Thanks.
All right. Okay. So perhaps as hopefully many of the attendees are pondering their journeys and what could be their next steps, what would be kind of advice that you could provide to those folks who are considering undertaking the journey that you've already undertaken? If we can't start with you, Beth, I think you've done this the longest. Maybe you have the most wisdom and experience that you can share with the attendees.
Thanks, Anthony. I think a lot of the main points I would encourage you to think about what we've covered here. What are your pain points and what do you want from it? If you can make that determination, then I think that will really help guide you in your decision-making process. And I think, again, just going back to that, we don't have enough people to do all the work that is being given to us. So we need to figure out how to be smart and how we partner with people who partner with people who will help us achieve our goals. I talk to many vendors and for some, it's clear that they're willing to be that great partner. Others, it's less clear. It feels like it's just a very large product suite that somehow we need experts just to help us understand what the offering is. So I think really figure out what you want from the experience. And then as always, if you can identify the funding ahead of time, I think that's always helpful. We tend to get tripped up a little bit because we figure out what we want and then go after the funding, and that can sometimes delay things.
Great, thank you. Travis?
So, as I look at this, we used a key time for us in that we had a major capital expenditure coming. Obviously, you want to look down the road at when it makes sense for you, as Beth mentioned, from a financial perspective. But the other thing I would ask others looking at this is, how hard is it for you to replace the person or the team that currently oversees your VDI environment, your virtual desktop environment? If some of those key players were to leave, can you replace them? What's the market like for that? And the reason I bring that up is because with a partner, whether it be Oporto or another partner, however you choose to do it, the advantage for us is, as I mentioned, the folks that oversee this now, their workload is very different. It is a lot lighter workload, and it is much easier to replace a person that would be in that situation. Our environment would also remain running and functional should we lose a key person or two. That's the thing for me is about delivering those services to the campus. What are you really focused on? Are you focused on delivering servers and infrastructure, or are you focused on delivering the value to the campus? And for me, it's a simple decision. The question is, when is the right time for you? Is there a major event about to happen or something that you could leverage to then look at switching over to something like a cloud-based environment?
Great, thank you, Travis. James?
Yeah, I think all I would add to what Travis and Beth mentioned is there's a tendency as we're talking through an endeavor like this to look inward. In other words, what are the considerations that we have from an IT perspective in terms of how we reallocate staff, what our resource commitments are going to be, things like that. The other half of that equation, though, is the user experience. And my advice to anyone engaging in a project like this would be not to overlook that, because inevitably, as systems change, so does the user experience. In some ways, it changes for the better. In other ways, maybe it's a change that people are not quite comfortable with. But having the foresight to have those conversations about what the differences are going to be, the advantages of making the changes that we're making, why we're doing it. They were extremely important considerations in the success of our program, and that would be my advice to others as well.
Great. Thank you, James. Thank you. So now we're going to open the Q&A session. And I know you guys have been, the audience has been, asking questions along the way. So I'm going to pick a few questions, and some of which I'm going to answer because they relate directly to technology of Aporto, some of which I'm going to redirect to the panel. One question talks about the fact that Aporto does not have a client, and that this end user's experience with virtualization is that the user experience is much better with a client than it is in the browser. And the answer to that question is that while this is true in general, we took it on ourselves because we're internet native, right? The company has not been around, from earlier than the internet. So from day one, we put all of our resources in optimizing the delivery in the browser. We do a lot of compression, decompression, geo-optimization. We use a lot of technology to make sure that the end user experience in the browser is what we call near native. So I encourage you to test it out. In fact, on our website, there's an area where you can say, try it now. And we make a number of applications available, like SolidWorks and AutoCAD and Adobe, and try it out for yourself. Probably the location is not optimized for where you are. Location matters when it comes to virtual desktops, but I think you'd get a good sense that the user experience is very, very, very good. Okay, another question. So a question by Sheila. Once you move to a cloud VDI solution, what helped you in evaluating where you can save on costs, right? I mean, maybe, I guess, Sheila's question pertains to the fact you may not want to move everything, or maybe you want to prioritize those areas where you can achieve savings. Travis, since you've done this most recently, did you want to take a shot at this?
Well, I'll give it a chance here. So for us, one of the things we did before moving over was we looked at our usage metrics with our Horizon VMware Horizon environment to see what would we need when moving over to Aporto, and what would that configuration look like. And the nice thing about moving to a cloud vendor is you can scale up and scale down and so forth, and that does allow you some flexibility. Now, of course, there are constraints with that, as there are with a lot of other things. But one of the things that we've been doing is looking at the usage information and so forth to see where are we actually using those VMs, when are they not being used, are there opportunities for us to do things differently. So the metrics and so forth that we get from the system tell us a lot of how we are using the system and where there might be opportunities to perhaps save. The specific issue, though, when talking about GPU and so forth, for us, that's made based on the requirements of the software. So knowing how many instances of a GPU delivery we need versus a non-GPU delivery. So those are all questions we work through, but we use the analytics we get from the tool to tell us, are we using it effectively? Might we need more? Might we be able to shift some things around?
Yeah. Another really good question that came up is by Matt. How do you handle cases where students don't own a personal computer without a physical lab? What about exams and the need to lock down software like a lockdown browser? Beth, do you want to take a shot at this one?
I don't think I can speak to the lockdown browser. I honestly am not sure where we stand on that one. But as far as students who don't have access to a computer, you know, I mean, I think actually, believe it or not, a portal would work on a phone. We don't recommend that at all because most of the specialized software really won't kind of work on a phone. So I think we typically would just encourage our students to go to a computer lab. And even throughout the pandemic, we always had a physical location. We made a physical lab available to students to get access to the specialized software that they need. So I think that is how we handled kind of that question of student devices. And I actually think of, is it a myth or is it for real, right? Because when we query our students, it's always a fear from faculty that students won't have access to a computer. But when we query our students, the reality is 99.9% of them do have access to some type of computer hardware.
Yeah,
Anthony, if I could add on to that
Sure.
as well. Prior to our implementation of cloud-based desktop as a service, we had a laptop loaner program already that allowed students to check out a device if they need to for some reason. We expanded that to include a bank of Chromebooks, as we touched on earlier, being a usable device for cloud-based desktop as a service, in preparation for exactly what we're talking about, which some students, for one reason or another, may not have access to a device, so they have the ability to check those out in order to connect to the virtual desktop. Interestingly, to Beth's point, we've found utilization of that loaner program to be moderate, meaning we always have some on hand, because we found, as Beth mentioned, students have the ability generally to find a device to use somewhere, but we have that as a backup if for some reason students are not able to find one.
And I'll just add to that is we also have a loaner program available. And I just want to be clear, when we moved to Porto from VMware Horizon, we did not eliminate all of our physical labs and so forth. We still have labs on campus. We're just now providing another avenue. And as was mentioned during the pandemic, I mean, those physical labs were rarely used. And so it's just another way to deliver it. Now we are looking, and I think Beth mentioned this in the opening, we are looking at whether we continue to have as many physical computer lab spaces that we do right now. So those will probably decline, which again, then you're starting to look at shifting costs as well.
Great, thank you. A very good question just came up from Adam. And, you know, he asked, where do workloads for end users run Azure, and what source of image management is involved? So the workloads can run on Azure. They can run on AWS, depending on your location, depending on number of criteria. They can run on-prem, as we discussed earlier. And really, in terms of, again, our design objective when we started the project, when we started the product, is that we wanted to make it as simple as possible so that somebody who is used to imaging PCs in a physical computer lab would be able to transition to managing a Porto in the cloud. So we hide all of that infrastructural complexity, you know, setting up networks, setting up hosts, all of that. There is some image management that you can do. There's obviously some user management, some integration. All of that is very, very simple stuff, but we hide all the infrastructural complexity away from you. So you can focus, as Travis mentioned, on really what matters, which is, you know, enabling student outcomes. One more question. All right. Did any of you folks look at Nutanix Frame before going with a Porto? I'll ask this this question.
No, we,
Nope.
as mentioned in the chat, we did not consider that.
Okay. All right. Andy Anderson, does hyperspeed work with all browsers? I presume this is hyper streaming, and yes, it does work on all browser, and no, it does not require any plugin. Jason, are we coming towards the end of our session here at the top of the hour?
Yes, I think so. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free. Otherwise, I might hand it over to Anthony for any final thoughts as we head towards our conclusion.
Right. Well, I want to thank the panelists. Please join me in thanking the great panelists who took the time to share their learnings, to share their wisdom with you all. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, James. I think this was a great session, and I can tell from the number of folks who were engaged, were asking questions, the number of attendees. We had at its peak about 115 attendees, which is a very good set of attendees. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank Educause for hosting this session. And this is to be continued. I'm sure we'll have a follow-up session very soon. Thank you.
Fantastic. And you see all the great thank yous in the chat there. On behalf of Educause and our speakers today, thank you for joining us. Before you sign off, please do take the opportunity to fill out our session evaluation. There's a link that I posted there in the chat. We really do appreciate your feedback and utilize it. The session's recording and presentation slides that I did not share will be posted, which will have the panelist questions. That'll be posted on the event site later today, and feel free to share that and the recording with your colleagues. Finally, please join us for our next Industry and Campus webinar on February 7th to hear how California Polytechnic State University centralized IT to provide a modern software hub for students. On behalf of Educause, I'm Jason Martin. Thank you so much for joining us.